Today is November 25th, 2014. I'm Adrienne Falaise, and it is my honor to be interviewing Alf Clausen for the Archive of American Television here at his home in Canyon Country, California. All right, so we're just going to start right at the beginning. What was your name at birth?
What was my name?
Your name at birth.
My name is Alf.
Your full name.
My full name. You really want my full name?
I want it all, yep.
Oh my goodness. It's Alf Faya Heiberg Clausen.
All right. And when and where were you born?
I was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota, March 28th, 1941.
And did you grow up there as well?
I did not. It was a very quick delivery.
Where did you grow up?
Jamestown, North Dakota.
And at what point did you guys move to North Dakota?
When I was very, very young, it's an interesting little story. My mother, who was kind of a Renaissance woman, was working on her master's degree at Iowa State University in Ames, Iowa. And she and my cousin decided that they were going to go shopping in Minneapolis for the weekend. So they went to Minneapolis, and they were going through Dayton's department store, and my mother's water broke. And so they rushed her to Swedish Hospital in Minneapolis, and I was born in Swedish Hospital in Minneapolis. When that was settled down, went back to Ames. She finished her master's degree, and then we moved to North Dakota.
Wow. What were your parents' names, and what did they do for a living?
My mother's name was Magdalene Clausen. She was a home extension agent for Stutzman County, North Dakota. My dad's name was also Alf, with no middle name, Alf Clausen, and he was an occupational therapist at the North Dakota Mental Hospital in Jamestown.
You have any siblings?
I do. I have one sister. Her name is Faye.
What traits do you think you inherited from your parents?
Patience, which comes to really good use in dealing with what I have to deal with. My mother was very musical. We had a piano in the house, and I was taking piano lessons at a very, very early age and disliking every moment of it. But she persisted and kept me going, and she had an interesting part of her career. She would supervise homemakers clubs meetings, where homemakers clubs were when she would tell people in the outlying districts of Jamestown how to cook, how to sew, how to keep house, etc. And during the homemakers clubs meetings, she would have me singing to the homemakers of the meeting, and when I was 5 years old, singing Norwegian songs in short pants, and she would accompany me on the piano. So that was my first professional gig.
Did you enjoy singing?
No, not at that point.
Was music a big part of your childhood?
It was, yeah, it was. My parents had the veritable Victrola, with the old records, and I loved orchestral music. I loved vocal music. Got a chance to listen to a lot of things.
What were some of your favorites?
Oh, wow. I remember listening to Nelson Eddy and Jeanette MacDonald. I can't even put a name on it anymore because it was so so long ago. It's the memory fades.
Did you play any instruments?
I did. I played piano first, and then in the 7th grade, I played French horn. I got picked by the high school band director to play French horn, so I played French horn all the way through high school, college, professionally when I graduated. When I went to college in North Dakota, in Fargo, North Dakota State University, I also picked up the bass, both electric and acoustic, and I worked on both electric and acoustic for many years professionally.
So when you were growing up playing the French horn, what kind of stuff did you like to play?
Well, fortunately, the high school where I went, Jamestown High School, had a really great music program. They had a great band director and a great choral director, and both of them would expose us to the classics, needless to say, and some very, very special music that was not really thought about too much in the school systems, but these two guys were really astute in their choices, and I didn't realize it at the time, but as I got farther into my educational process, I realized that the titles they had picked were just extremely special, and so I owe them a lot.
Do you remember what some of those pieces were?
No. I wish I could be more helpful there, but as I say, the memory fades.
Did you watch a lot of television growing up?
I did, from the very beginning. You know, I remember when we got our first television set, and I watched religiously every week, and there I do remember one of my favorites was American Bandstand, Dick Clark's American Bandstand. And I used to watch that every week. I could hardly wait to get home from school and check it out.
What did you like about it?
I loved the possibility of being exposed to pop music of the day. And, of course, they always used the best hit records that they could find for this show. And I really enjoyed the kids from Philadelphia dancing as well. And, yeah, that was about it. There was another program that was on, and for the longest time I've been trying to find the name of it, but I remember that it featured big band music and how knocked out I was by listening to big band music. I'll have to do some more research and find out what that really was. I just can't remember.
And what did you like about the big band music?
Oh, my goodness, the excitement of it, the fact that you can have 18 people in a band playing the same thing at the same time and swinging their little tails off. It was just so exciting to listen to.
So was music kind of your main interest as a kid, or did you have other hobbies and interests too?
I had a lot of other hobbies. The biggest one probably was Lionel trains. I had a huge Lionel train set up in the basement with 2 4x8 pieces of plywood. And I spent a lot of time by myself down there. And my therapist at one point told me, well, you're just reliving your childhood. You're spending all of your time by yourself in your studio, even now, you know. It's just like playing with your train set, writing my scores.
Did you know? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. I think that I had a very normal growing up. My parents were very open to new things, encouraging the children, myself and my sister, to be adventurous and to do new things. And I didn't realize it at the time because we had our differences, as kids and parents do, of course. But I look back on it now, and I'm very thankful that they gave me the kind of childhood I had.
Did you know what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Rich. No, I'm sorry. No, I really didn't. I didn't have a clue. I was, as I say, I was really interested in model trains. I was interested in automobiles. I started the first National Hot Rod Association car club in Jamestown, North Dakota, which exists to this day, called the Road Knights. I loved cars. Seemed to love anything mechanical. And when I was in my later high school days, I was taking college entrance tests to see what I would be good at because I had no idea what to do in college. And all of the results came back saying that I would be good at mechanical engineering. So I majored in mechanical engineering when I went to college.
And where did you go to college?
North Dakota State University in Fargo.
Okay.
So I majored in mechanical engineering for about 2.5 years, but music won out.
What point how did you decide to study music then?
Well, I was studying music all along when I was going to school, and I had an epiphany. It was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. My mom and dad decided to send me out to New York City to stay with a cousin of mine who is a professional musician. They sent me out during the summer break, and my cousin, the professional musician, and his wife, who was born in Norway, wined and dined me and showed me Manhattan Island for 6 weeks. And while I was there, I got to see the original My Fair Lady on Broadway with Rex Harrison and Julie Andrews. I got to see the original West Side Story with Larry Kert and and whoever else was there. I got to see the original Music Man by Robert Preston. With Robert Preston, I got to see the original How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying with Robert Morse. I got to go to the Goldman Band concerts in Central Park. I got to go to the Randall's Island Jazz Festival, and I'm sitting next to this little black kid up in the bleachers in the back, and I turned to him at one point and I said, "Who's this trumpet player?" And he says, "Oh man," he says, "you got to pay attention to him. That's Miles Davis." Oh yeah, and it was the Miles Davis Kind of Blue Band with Cannonball Adderley and John Coltrane and Bill Evans. It was just an unbelievable experience, and it just spun me around big time, and I was a changed person when I went back to North Dakota. And I realized at that point that there was some kind of an allure going on there that really dangled a carrot in front of me, and I had no idea how to get involved in that because back in North Dakota, nobody really knew what professional musicians were up against, how they developed a career. So I went back to North Dakota at the end of that 6 weeks, and I lasted about a quarter and a half in mechanical engineering. Finally, music won out. So I went to my advisor and told him I was changing my major, and he says, "Why?" And I told him why and what it was, and he said, "Well, we were just about to offer you a $500 scholarship, but good luck." So that's what happened. I finished my degree in music at North Dakota State. A changed person, I might add, really a changed person. At the end of my education at North Dakota State, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, other than I knew I didn't want to teach music because all of my friends in music were going out and taking teaching jobs at very small schools for not much money. And I thought, no, that's not what I want to do. I really want to get involved in the theater part of it and all of that. So I decided to go work on my master's degree at the University of Wisconsin because one of my teachers from North Dakota State had gone to Wisconsin to teach. And following up on the way music teachers move around to the various educational institutions, I discovered that there was a studio French horn player in New York City whose name was John Barrows, who decided to retire from the business in New York City, and he took a teaching job at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, which is where I was working on my master's. My intent was to find out from John Barrows more about the studio scene in New York City, and maybe he could give me some hints as to what steps I could take. So I went to work on my master's, studied horn with him. It turned out to be a disastrous experiment because he and I butted heads like this. We didn't get along at all. And I was so disappointed, and yet I said, well, okay, if it is what it is. So while I was going to school there, I was taking a correspondence course from the Berklee College of Music in arranging and composition. It's a 25-lesson correspondence course. And the more I got into it, the more I got sucked into it, and the more I thought, boy, this is really fun. I really enjoy this. So I finished up the correspondence course, and I wrote back to Berklee to my instructor, and I said, okay, now where can I get some more of this? I want to keep doing this. And he says, well, the only thing you can do is come to school here. So I hung up University of Wisconsin. I didn't even finish the first semester. Went to the Berklee College of Music. Went through their entire 4-year program in 2.5 years, went year-round, taught there part-time. After graduation, I taught there full-time for a year, and really enjoyed being in the hotbed of arranging and composing and jazz music and all that kind of stuff. But knew that if I wanted to get involved in what I had dreamed about now, it was either going to New York or to Los Angeles, one of the two. And I asked one of my favorite teachers there what he would suggest, and he said, you'll find that if you stay in Boston, you're going to have to work 3 jobs to make ends meet because the scales are so low here and there's so many students in Boston. So it keeps the lid on prices. So he said, I would suggest either going to New York or Los Angeles, so just kind of take your choice. So my wife at the time and I flew out actually. We flew out to Los Angeles, drove around for several days, checking out what what it was like in Los Angeles and decided that we would like to live there and raise kids there more than in New York. So at the end of my first term of teaching at Berkeley, we packed up the Volkswagen and drove out to California and settled out here.
Had you been playing in bands or anything at that
Oh
time
yeah,
too?
oh yeah. I was playing in a lot of bands, and what was really cool about the Berkeley experience is that with me being a French horn player, I was the only French horn player at the school. So every band that put a special concert or rehearsal together or whatever, they always wanted to include a French horn player because they'd never had a French horn player before. So I got to play with everybody. It was just fantastic, and the jazz people who came through that school at that particular time were just awe-dropping. Sadao Watanabe was probably Japan's most well-known saxophone player. He came to study there. Miroslav Vitus was a very, very famous bass player from, I think he was from Poland, and he came to study there. The musicianship was just crazy. It was just so wonderful, and it was the best thing I ever did.
So when you moved out to Los Angeles then, how did you start to find work?
Begging. I had worked, well, let me back up with that one just for a moment. When I was at Berkeley, I ended up becoming an instructor for the correspondence course, round robin, So when I decided to move to Los Angeles, I contacted all the people nearby in Los Angeles that I knew and let them know I was coming, and anything that they could do to help me find work would be appreciated. So one guy wrote me back, and it turned out that he was a studio bass player. And so he says, make sure you call me when you get out here, and I'll see if I can help you. So when we moved there, I called him, met with him. He was teaching over the Reseda House of Music. And we got together. We hit it off right away, and he invited me to come down to the old Dino's Club down on the Sunset Strip, where he was going to be working with a couple of guys. So I went down to visit him, maybe sit in with the band. And I got a nice welcome to L.A. Reception. At the end of the night, I walked out and my car had been towed. My first night in L.A. But I got over that, and so he was able to feed some jobs my way, and he got me connected up with a husband and wife team. They played restaurants around town, and they hired me as a bass player, and I worked with them for about a year. So that kind of got us going, got us settled down, and then my wife at the time was a home economics teacher, and she took a job teaching at Downey High School. And so we had a kind of a steady income going just to get me going.
So were you looking to get into music for television?
Yeah, I really was. I found it fascinating. Didn't know how to do it. The other nice thing that I had going was that when I was in Boston, I worked part-time doing music copying for the Boston Symphony. And so I had developed that skill to find some more work while my writing career was taking off. So when I moved here, I ended up working as a copyist in many of the what are called music preparation offices. And I was usually around the third call in each one of these offices. So when the show started needing the copying done, the guys would work for maybe 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, and then they would call me in to give them a bump at the very end before the recording sessions. And so I made some really interesting contacts doing that, and the cool thing was to be able to look at the scores that all of these master arrangers were writing for the television shows and kind of analyze what they were doing and to pick them apart in my brain and put them in the right slot so I could remember what they were. So I ended up working as a copyist on, oh my goodness, the Glenn Campbell Show, the Smothers Brothers Show, Tony Orlando, Carol Burnett. I remember working, it's kind of funny now because I work at Fox now on The Simpsons, and I remember working as a copyist at Fox on the original MASH movie, and Planet of the Apes, all as a copyist.
So what does a copyist do?
Well, a copyist extracts all of the individual instrumental parts from a score onto individual sheets of music, which they put on their music stands in the recording sessions. So they have their one line to play, and then another instrument has their own line to play. So a copyist extracts all those.
So you said you got to see a lot of those scores. What did you think of kind of the state of music on television at that point?
Oh, I thought it was great. I thought it was very much fun, and very interesting. And most of those shows were called variety shows because they were made up of many different kinds of skits. Different kinds of guest artists would come in. It was very informative. Met a lot of people in the copying departments who went to other places or started their own copying offices. I met Joanne Kane in Howard Drew's copying office. Joanne Kane moved in from Minneapolis, started working as a copyist, and now many years later she has Joanne Kane Music Service, which is the biggest copying service in the world. Mm-hmm. And she does the Simpsons show with me, and interesting how it all comes around eventually.
Are there any memories that stand out for you from those being a copyist on those early shows? You mentioned the Carol Burnett show.
Yeah, that was very interesting. The Carol Burnett show was conducted by Harry Zimmerman, who was the brother of Forrest Zimmerman, who worked in the copying office. And most of the time what would happen with variety shows is that the deadlines were very, very tight, and the scores would come in at the last minute. And so what we would end up doing is that we would have copying tables, let's say starting over here, and they would go all against that wall, make a right turn, go against that wall, make a right turn, left turn, which way, ever we're talking about left turn, right turn against this wall. And we'd have guys sitting at the tables all the way around like this, and each guy would copy 4 measures off of a score page. And then once he got his 4 measures done, he would pass the score page to the next guy. The next guy would copy 4 measures. They would pass it on to the next guy. So that was the drill about getting these scores copied very, very quickly under the gun with really tight deadlines. And the hours were atrocious. Everybody was really dragging by the time we would get done, but boy, did we get paid well. And that's one of the reasons that I did it, because it was a really great way to not only get to see the scores of the masters, but it was also a great way to support the family. So it was quite a few years that I ended up doing that part-time. The fun part about doing the copying for the films like Planet of the Apes and MASH, etc., was that I got a chance to go to the scoring sessions and to listen to the orchestra play the cues that we had just copied and to learn what had been done by the masters. You know, like Planet of the Apes was Jerry Goldsmith and MASH was Johnny Mandel. And it's the kind of experience that you can't buy. It's just something that you just kind of work into. And if people are open to you visiting, you go and visit. And now we come full circle, and I'm doing Simpsons, and I have many people coming to visit me, which I like to share with everybody to show that this can be accomplished, and you can do this if you put your mind to it.
What do you think you learned from observing those sessions?
Well, I learned a lot about arranging and orchestrating, needless to say, because each, I have to laugh, because each composer had his own way of notating his scores, and sometimes a score would come in and we'd look at it in the copying office and it was the absolute worst penmanship you had ever seen in your life, and I said, oh, another legend shot to hell. You know, I couldn't believe that here was a guy who had this wonderful name in the business about being one of the top composers, and he had a hand that you could hardly read. It was just, it was wild. It was kind of like many years ago, Sally and I went on a trip to Europe. We went on a cruise, and we got a chance to see Chopin's summer house. And in Chopin's summer house, they had a picture of one of his scores up on the wall, and his handwriting was atrocious. And I said to Sally, he should have taken a music preparation course before starting to write.
So how's your penmanship?
It used to be good.
So did you do some work on the Partridge Family as well?
Copying, music copying.
Okay, so same sort of thing.
Yeah, and because of the fact that I was freelance and usually third call in a number of the top offices in town, I would just make my way around depending on who would call first. So each week was almost kind of like a different experience copying.
Did you have any favorites of the shows that you did copying for?
They were all pretty much the same. You know, the variety show part of it was pretty much the same. The routines were the same. I'm sure I'll think later when the camera's off that that there was a favorite, but at the moment they were all pretty much the same. Yeah.
And then in 1977, you started working as an arranger and conductor on Donnie and Marie.
Right.
How did that come about?
Actually, I think it was 1976.
76?
Yeah, I started working as an arranger on the show, and it was an interesting development. I had made a really good friend of a songwriter and pianist and special material writer, Tommy Wolfe. And a special material writer does just that for variety shows, assembles songs in medleys, figures out keys that the guest artist can sing in, writes dance music for the dancers. And I first met Tommy when he was a rehearsal pianist on the Red Skelton show. And we hit it off really well. And so one thing led to another with Tommy and my friendship with him. We ended up writing an oratorio together. And the oratorio started with very humble beginnings. We got a commission to do it from Golden West College in Huntington Beach. And our instruction was to write something that was about 20 minutes long, which I thought, boy, I don't know if I can do that. That's really interesting, but give it a shot. So we started writing, and Tommy would keep feeding me lyrics. And he'd say to me, I don't know where this is going yet. Just work on it, and I'll send you some more in a little while. So one thing led to another. The whole thing ended up being 2 hours and 15 minutes. And we had a number of performances down at Golden West College and also at Cal State Northridge, and the people just loved it. They were just knocked out by the whole thing. So I had proven my sort, so to speak, as an arranger at that point with Tommy as well as another number of other people. So then Tommy went from the Red Skelton show to the Donnie and Marie show as a rehearsal pianist and special material writer. And one day I got a call from him, and he said, are you available to do an arrangement? And I said, yeah. I said, of course. When do you need it? Tomorrow morning. I said, really? And he said, yeah. He says, I've got a sketch and a tape for you to listen to. I'll have it delivered out to your house. And if you can get on it right away, that would really help. We can't find the music director, Tommy Oliver. We have no idea where he is, and we need this chart done. So they messengered the stuff out to me, and I'm checking it all out and getting to work, and I'm getting into the depths of the evening and into the depths of the night and the depths of the morning. And I'm finishing up about 4 o'clock in the morning, and I put the chart in my mailbox, and they picked it up from my mailbox and took it to the copyist's office and copied it and took it into the session at 8 o'clock in the morning and recorded it. So I went to bed. At about 11 o'clock in the morning, my phone rang, and I answered the phone, and the voice said, I'm looking for Alf Clausen, and I said, speaking, and he said, this is Tommy Oliver, the music director of the Donnie and Marie show. I said, oh, hello, how you doing? I'd never met him. And he said, well, I don't know who you are, but your arrangement was fabulous, and I'd like you to work on the show every week if you'd be interested. I said, let me check my schedule. So that was my intro to working on Donnie and Marie. So I started with very humble beginnings on the show of writing the arrangements, I should say, for some of the guest artists who would come in and do solo numbers. But the more time I spent doing that and proving my worth, Tommy Oliver started handing me more and more stuff to do. So, excuse me, by the time I ended up at the end of the show, I was arranging the 400 measure production numbers. And just diving in and doing the work and turning it in, and everything played down beautifully and everything was fine. So they loved the work that I was doing, so they kept hiring me. So at the end of the first season that I was working on, Tommy Oliver decided that he wasn't going to come back to the show. He had another show going, and so he had to make a choice. So he decided that he wasn't going to come back to the Donnie and Marie show. When we were doing the recording sessions for Donnie and Marie at SunWest Studios in Hollywood on Sunset Boulevard, Wayne Osmond was supervising the booth of our recording sessions, one of the Osmond brothers. So when Tommy Oliver turned in his notice that he wasn't coming back, everybody was talking about, well, who can we get? Who can we get? And there were a couple of days where Tommy actually couldn't conduct the orchestra, so he asked if I conducted, and I said, I do. And he says, well, would you sit in for me? So I sat in for him, conducted the 2 episodes, and Wayne Osmond had watched me work. So he suggested that they try me as a music director. So I told them I would be interested, so they gave me a 3-show option, a 3-show commitment with a 2-show option, with a 5-show option, with a 5-show option, because they wanted to be able to get rid of me at any point if I wasn't working out. But fortunately, I kept working and working and working, and they kept me. So I ended up doing the 3rd season of Donnie and Marie as music director, and it was in my opinion, it was the best season. The ABC spent the most money on it. People like Lucille Ball, and it was just incredible what they would do, who they would hire. So that was really so much fun and so interesting, and really my first experience at operating at that level with that kind of stress and responsibility. Loved every minute of it. I just ate it up. And I was telling Sally a long time ago that I would reward myself at the end of each one of our pre-record sessions that I was successful at. I would walk across to the nearest record store, and I would buy a record that I always wanted but never felt I could afford. And I rewarded myself, having done a good job, by buying a record for myself to pay me off, to keep me going.
That's great. Do you remember what some of those treat records were?
I think maybe Miles Davis and Gil Evans and his orchestra, stuff like that, really great jazz records.
So tell us about the responsibilities of a music director. What was that jump like from arranger to director?
The music director interacts with a number of people on the show. In the case of the Donnie and Marie show, we had a really large staff. The vocal arrangements were being written by Earl Brown, who was a classic vocal arranger. I think I had 3 arrangers working under me. Claude Williamson was doing the arrangements for the Ice Skaters. Bob Rosario was doing the arrangements for the solo artists. I was doing all of the 400-bar production numbers still, and I think I had one other arranger who was filling in once in a while too. So my job was to supervise all of those folks, to oversee the vocals being done by Earl. Earl would call in the singers, and we had a fairly good-sized singing group to do all the background vocals. So I was part of that whole situation, oversee the recordings at the studio at SunWest. So it's just a lot of responsibility. There was so much going on with the Donnie and Marie show that we actually had 2 of the best mixers in town working in separate places at the same time, just to get everything finished in time. Tremendous amount of music every week. the production numbers, the ice skating, the solo numbers. There was just a lot to look after, so that was my job.
Did you work closely with the producers of the show as well?
No, I really didn't, which was interesting. All of my duties were kind of delineated before they got to me from the producers. I would go to the table read on Monday morning, and then we would read through the scripts and talk about what was needed, and then we were all dismissed to go and do our usual thing by ourselves. And I probably wouldn't see the light of day for 3 days, being stuck in my studio arranging on the phone all the time. I have to laugh at that one especially. I would get phone calls that would go like this. It would be Alan Osmond on the phone. I'd say, hello, hi, this is Alan Osmond, Alf. I said, how can I help you? And he said, well, you know that production number we're doing at the end of the show? He said, it's got this 8-measure song in here, we're cutting that. I said, oh, okay, so I'll just adjust. Click. So 2 hours later, the phone would ring. Hey, Alf, this is Merrill Osmond. You know the production number we're doing at the end of the show that has this 8-bar song down at the end of it? I said, yeah. And he says, we're changing the key. I said, wait a minute, I just was told it was cut. He said, who told you it was cut? I said, Alan. He said, no, that's not right. We're changing the key, but we're keeping it in the show. I said, okay, click. The phone would ring 2 hours later. Hey, Alf, it's Wayne Osmond. You know that number, this would go on, but they wouldn't talk to each other. So we had too many cooks in the kitchen, and when you're under the gun like that and you've got a lot of measures of music to write in a very short period of time, that's the last thing you want to hear. So I was ready to strangle them occasionally, but we got through it.
Did you work directly with Donnie and Marie?
I did. They were great, absolutely great. I love both of them, and they had the best lip sync ability of anybody I've ever seen. They were so musical.
Were you involved with choosing the music at all?
No, I wasn't. That was done pre-me. They would do that as part of the scripts.
So you mentioned you would arrange for the musical guests. Did you interact with them directly at all?
Let me see. No, I think basically my responsibility was getting the music written for them, or the arranged music for them, recording it in the studio. Then they would take the tracks to a different studio and record the guest artist in a different studio with my tracks.
Mm-hmm. And then why did you ultimately leave Donnie and Marie?
Well, you want all my secrets, don't you?
I do.
The long answer is that at the end of the 3rd season, the Osmonds decided that they didn't want to make music in Sin City anymore. They didn't like Los Angeles and they wanted to move. So they decided that they were going to build their own studio up in Orem, Utah. So they built the studio and were getting ready to start producing up there, and they wanted to know if I would make the trip up there to supervise the recording in Orem. And I said, yeah, I can do that. That would be fine. So I commuted between LA and Orem for, I think it was the last 6 episodes. And it was quite a grind. I would leave LAX Sunday afternoon, fly to Salt Lake City. They would pick me up at Salt Lake City, drive me to Provo, Utah, put me up in a travel lodge for 3 days where I would write day and night, do all the arrangements that I needed to do, and then Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock in the morning, we would start a recording session in the basement of their apartment building, which is where they had their record studio, where they made all their records. In somebody's lack of vision, they didn't realize that they needed a recording studio for the music. Welcome to Hollywood, right? So we ended up recording the music in their record studio in the basement of their apartment building. It was pretty small. In fact, it was so small that we had to take all of the couches out of the lobby and put the percussion instruments in the lobby and connect them with closed-circuit TV so they could see me and I could see them. And we recorded the entire show that way, and I remember standing on the podium for the very first recording of the ice skating music, which had the slowdown in it, which means that the conductor has to kind of wave his arms in big strokes to get the orchestra to slow down with him. And I started waving my hand, and I smashed my hand into the ceiling up above me because it was black burlap in the ceiling, and you couldn't see it in your peripheral vision. I mean, nothing but the best for us, right?
So that schedule got a little grinding then?
That got a little tough. So then when we finished recording on Wednesday morning, as soon as that was done, they would schlep everybody back to the airport to get on a private plane to fly back to Van Nuys. I left that part out. When I flew up from LAX, they also realized that they didn't have enough musicians up there who could really play the music with the quality that we wanted. So they flew 7 musicians up from Van Nuys Airport in a private plane up to Orem to record. And then when we were finished recording in Orem, they flew everybody back to Van Nuys, and including me. So I flew back with the guys on that plane. That was very interesting.
I bet. Tell us about that.
No, that's okay. We'll go past that one. So I had a couple of days off, and then the routine would start again on Sunday afternoon, flying back up to Orem. So that kept going for about 6 episodes, and then that was the end of the season. So I think what happened, one never gets stories straight in this world, especially in Hollywood. But I think what happened is that the Osmonds figured that it cost too much to fly me and everybody else up from LA, and they felt that they could get musicians from the surrounding neighborhoods to come in and play with good enough quality. It was never as great as it was when we were there in LA, but they figured it was good enough, so they let a number of us go, and it was kind of an odd situation. I didn't hear it from the Osmonds themselves, but I heard it from Jim Morey, who was one of their managers, who called me one day, and he says, I just want to let you know, I want to give you a heads up that you're not going to be asked back to the show. And I said, really? And he said, yeah. And I said, why? And he said, well, I don't really know, but he said, if I were you, he said, I would make the best of the situation, and I would just keep working on the show as an arranger and make the money. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. I said, I've done that. I've been there, done that already. My job's music director. Either I'm going to do my job or I'm not going to be involved. So at that point, that was the end of our relationship.
And then you did stay local, and you became a music director on the Mary Tyler Moore Hour.
Yeah, it worked out great. It worked out actually absolutely great. It's funny how stuff comes around when you least expect it to. I had made a friend of the head writer on the Donnie and Marie show, named Arnie Kogan. Arnie was a very famous writer in LA and also wrote for Mad Magazine in his spare time. And he and I got along really well. And so after the Donnie and Marie experience was done and I was back in LA, the phone rang one day and it was Arnie. And out of the blue, I didn't expect that. And so he said, I'm working on this new variety show over at CBS with Mary Tyler Moore, and would you like to be the music director of it? And I said, hey, let me check my schedule, So they hired me to do that. I will remember a couple of days' experience of that before the show started forever, because I was in love with Mary Tyler Moore, like every guy my age, I think, was, I got called in to do a meeting to talk about the show with the producers. So I went to CBS Television City, had the meeting. It went well. And they said, well, we'd like to have you come back and meet Mary and Grant Tinker, her husband. I said, okay, great. So I showed up the next day, and I go to CBS Television City, get out of the car, walk into the building, stand next to the elevator, and who walks in next to the elevator but Mary Tyler Moore? And I'm going, oh my God, are you kidding me? This is Mary Tyler Moore. I can't say anything. I'm so excited. God, I can't help this. Oh, Lord. So She said, "Are you Alf?" And I said, "Yes." She says, I'm Mary, and this is my husband, Grant. We got in the elevator, and we went upstairs and had the meeting, and they hired me.
Great.
Oh, my Lord, that was such a... what a moment. What a moment.
So what was that initial meeting like? What kind of stuff did you guys discuss?
Well, they just kind of went over what their concept was of the show, who was going to be in it, which I found very interesting. They had hired a group of repertory players who had never done television before. Michael Keaton, David Letterman, Susie Kurtz, Dick Shawn, and Mary. And I thought, wow, what a interesting group, you know. So they hired as producers Tom Patchett and Jay Tarsis, who had worked on the original Mary Tyler Moore show as writers and producers. So I met them as well. They said, let's go at it. Let's do it. So we started doing the production, and it was so much fun. Oh, my goodness, it was just so much fun. The routine was pretty much the same as it was on Donnie and Marie. The order of things, who did what. I was able to hire my friend Tommy Wolfe to be rehearsal pianist and special materials writer. Unfortunately, toward the end of the first season, the only season, he didn't show up for work one morning. He had passed away of a heart attack in his bed. And I was just devastated. We had such a close relationship, and it's the first time I'd really encountered that with a dear friend.
Yeah.
So we kept going, but it was never quite the same. About halfway through the show, the ratings were not very good at CBS, and they were upset about what was going on. So they decided that they were going to do a house cleaning job, and they fired everybody except me and Tommy, and totally restocked, started over again, got a new executive producer in Perry Lafferty. He had a different way of looking at things than Patchett and Tarsis did. New cast members. We got through to the end of the 22nd show. We did 22 shows. And then that was the end of Mary. She didn't get picked up again. The ratings weren't good enough.
And what kinds of music did you feature on the show?
Every conceivable kind of music that a variety show would do. I like to kid about the fact that I have Betamax tapes in my file of Michael Keaton and David Letterman and Susie Kurtz dancing around in bunny costumes, and just absolutely nutty things that if they knew I would have them, they would probably pay me a great deal to hide them.
Did you work directly with any of the cast on the music? Or
all of them. Yeah, all of them.
So tell us about their musical talents, or if someone had specific things they wanted to do. There's a thumbs down there. I don't know if you can see that on camera.
I'm sorry, I just got an itch in my thumb. I didn't mean anything by that. Well, they readily acknowledged that singing and dancing was not their strong suit. And so they were having to be trained on the job. And the choreographer was Tony Stevens, who was a very popular choreographer from New York City in the theater world. And he was a great guy. I got a chance to meet him and work with him. So he came in to L.A. and he worked with them, teach them how to sing and dance, etc. And Tommy Wolfe was also a great coach that way as well. The special material writer who had been hired originally, whose name is Stan Freeman, and he was a musical theater guy as well. And so we had an abundance of talent going on. So it was really fun.
Did you have input on the type of songs that would be performed?
No, once again, it was originated from the producer's standpoint as part of the scripts.
So let's move on to talking about some of your early composing work for television. Do you remember what your first composition for TV was?
Oh my goodness, you're kidding.
If you recall.
Oh, wow.
Could have been on Wizards and Warriors, maybe?
Oh, no, that came much later.
That was later?
That came much later. Oh. Well, with the Donnie and Marie show, for instance, I had to compose some background music. I had to compose some transition music from scene to scene. So I kind of got my feet wet doing that. But there wasn't any great shakes to all of that. You know, there were small pieces of music, but nevertheless, it was a start.
Mm-hmm. So was Wizards and Warriors then the first show that you actually composed?
No, that was much later as well. As a TV film composer, I started working with a number of very well-established composers in Los Angeles, doing arrangements, doing compositions, doing ghostwriting, etc., stuff like that. I got to know a number of them quite well. I worked for Ira Newborn quite often on movies. I did the Ferris Bueller's Day Off with him, Into the Night, Airplane 2, the sequel.
So what were your
Dragnet.
roles? You writing incidental music, or what
Well, I was writing
these?
incidental music and writing what they call additional compositions by.
Mm-hmm.
Actually writing some of the composed music. I worked with Elmer Bernstein for a little while. Worked for Lalo Schifrin. I orchestrated for Lalo Schifrin for quite some time. It was a wonderful experience. One thing led to another. I orchestrated for a composer by the name of Bill Goldstein. And Bill Goldstein was the kind of guy who has the biggest heart. And if he takes a liking to you, he doesn't keep it to himself. He spreads it among his friends. And so I orchestrated for him for a while, and he really liked the work that I did for him. So he would call Lalo. He's the one who called Lalo for me, and he'd say, "Lalo, this is Bill Goldstein. Have you ever heard of Alf Clausen?" Lalo said, "No." "Well, you got to know this guy. I want you to take a meeting with him. He's really great." So he would set up the meeting for me, and I'd go to the meeting, and Lalo would hire me based on the results of the meeting, and we got to do things together. It was just really fun. So one thing led to another, and Bill one day called Lee Holdridge. Did the same thing. "Lee, you ever heard of Alf Clausen?" "No." "Well, you got to get to know this guy. He's really great. I want you to meet with him, blah, blah, blah." So we set up a meeting, and Lee and I hit it off like this, became the best of friends. And I worked a lot for Lee on Wizards and Warriors. As Lee got to know my work, his situation was that he would take a television series with the idea of writing the main title theme, turning the score music on a weekly basis over to one of his arrangers, composers, etc. Then he would move on and get another series and write another theme, because at that point, themes paid a lot of money. So we tried to do that in a number of cases, including Wizards and Warriors, which I think we had 7 episodes of, hoping that it would go to series, but it never lasted longer than 7 episodes. So we tried again, and we tried again. And so one day Lee called me and he said, "I'm doing this pilot for ABC and it looks really good." He says, "I was wondering if you'd be willing to orchestrate the pilot for me, and I'd like to introduce you to the exec producer, Glenn Gordon Caron, the creator." I said, "Sure." And he said, "If he likes your work, maybe we will hire you." So I orchestrated the pilot for him. It went well. ABC loved it. They gave him a 5-show commitment. Lee introduced me to Glenn. He said, "I'd like to have you give Alf a chance at doing the episodes." Glenn said, "Yeah, I'd like to do that." But just in case, he hired another composer to split episodes with me, just in case I fell on my face. It all worked out for the best, fortunately. So Glenn really liked my work. So I ended up doing... I did the first episode, the other guy did the second episode, I did the third episode, the other guy did the 4th episode. Glenn didn't like the 4th episode, threw it out and hired me to come back and redo the 4th episode, and kept me from that point on.
And the show was?
Moonlighting.
Moonlighting.
The show was Moonlighting.
So talk about working with Glenn Gordon Caron.
Oh boy, what a roller coaster. First of all, I love Glenn Gordon Caron. He's such a talent. He's just an amazing guy. But that doesn't cover up the fact that he was just impossible with deadlines. Oh my God, he believed that you could do your best work with 1 foot off the edge of the cliff. There was hardly any time to do scores for this show. We would oftentimes do music spotting Tuesday afternoon and record on Friday for an hour drama with 35 players. And this would go week after week after week. Sometimes it got worse, sometimes it got better, but most of the time it got worse. And I would call Glenn on the phone and I would say, Glenn, you got to help me out here. I said, I'm dying with this stuff. You got to give me some more time. I said, give me an extra 5 hours. No, kid, you're doing great. Just keep doing what you're doing. So away we would go. We'd do another one. And I did 4 years of that, knowing that I was going to be up all night Thursday night every week that we would record on Friday. Just accepted it for what it was because it was such a great show and it was so musically driven. Glenn just had such an interesting way of going after music for television. And I thought, I really see what's going to happen to my career here if I keep doing this show. I got to stick this out because it's getting everybody's attention. There was no show like it on the air.
So how was music used on the show?
Well, music was borrowed from, was created anew. Glenn would give me various challenges that I had never encountered before, probably the most famous of which is the most wonderful piece of television I think ever done, which was the black and white show on Moonlighting.
That's The Dream Sequence Always Rings Twice.
The Dream Sequence Always Rings Twice.
Tell us about that.
Oh my goodness! Well, it was done in black and white, and the story basically was Bruce Willis was the trumpet player in a big band, and Sybil was the chirp, as they used to call her, the singer. And the show was divided into 2 stories. The same story, but coming from first Bruce's perspective and then Sybil's perspective, which was totally different. We pre-recorded quite a bit of music for that episode because Glenn wanted music tracks to shoot to. So I recorded a bunch of big band music in the style of the period. And they took the tracks and went down to the Aquarius Theater in Hollywood and rented out the Aquarius Theater for a week and had a big band down there sidelining for a week to these tracks to put this show together. And it was a remarkable experience just to watch how the whole thing was put together. And he loved the work that I did. I loved the work that he did. We had mutual respect, and to this day, my heart is warmed when I think about that show because it was so great. It was just an absolutely wonderful piece.
We're going to stop there and talk more about it on the next tape.
Sure.